Welcome everyone to the Greater Houston Community Foundation Donor and Client COVID-19 webinar briefing. I want to convey from the entire staff at GHCF that we hope you and your loved ones are safe and healthy and finding some hope and inspiration during this very difficult time for our country and for our world. We're honored that you have chosen to spend an hour with us, even if it's just virtually. And I'm so glad to see so many of your names and email addresses popping up as attendees today. My name is Jennifer Touche, and I'm Vice President of Personal and Family Philanthropy at Greater Houston Community Foundation. Here at Greater Houston Community Foundation, we are a philanthropic hub for the community. So we have the opportunity and responsibility to connect with people and organizations across different sectors, all who are focused really on the same purpose of responding to our community's crisis and to help people. We are one community, and our webinar today will offer a few insights and updates for a cross-section of the philanthropic community: donors and foundations, nonprofits, companies, and individuals. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. First, please note that this webinar is being recorded. We plan to post this video to share with GHCF donors and clients who are unable to join us today. Now, I'd like to get started and turn it over to Steve Maislin, our President and CEO. Steve.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our first ever GHCF donor webinar, so we're excited you're with us. This might become a tool for us even after we move past the pandemic, as so many other things may be. At GHCF, we are a family-first organization. When disaster strikes, the first staff communication each time is about taking care of yourself and your family first, and that if you need to go offline to take some time off to handle issues, the rest of the team will step up. And we've done that every time we've had to deal with a disaster, including this one. And I think it's important that you know that we have that same feeling about you, our donor family, and our other colleagues, our nonprofit colleagues, advisors, and other supporters who are joining us today. So I want to emphasize what Jennifer had said. We are really sincere in saying that we hope you and your families are safe and well during this difficult time. Now, I'd like to give you an administrative update on the Community Foundation. We're delighted to say that we are up and running and fully functional. We are, as you would expect, fully remote, and we're learning. We've become experts at Zoom muting and unmuting, for example. Our transactional services, gifts and grants, are fully operational. We cut our first set of grant checks yesterday for the first time without anyone having to be in the office. So the system is up and running. I do want to remind you that we have a lockbox. If you're sending in checks, please use that lockbox address. And I also want to let you know that we're currently experiencing, for understandable reasons, a serious delay in delivery from the United States Postal Service. So if you send in a check and it hasn't been posted for a couple weeks, there is at least some chance we will not have received it yet. So always feel free to reach out, but want to let you know that that is happening. Also, we always encourage you, our donors, to do what you can in crisis. It's absolutely normal for us that our grants go up and our gifts go down. And we really take pleasure in this small role we serve as a community circuit breaker, where our donors can really step up because they have funds already positioned with us ready to deploy quickly. I also want you to know that we are healthy financially. We're already looking at medium-term plans, trying to ask ourselves the questions around what the new normal will be and what the impact will be on our business model. Community foundations have been around for over 100 years, and indeed, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary just this year. We intend to be around for a long time. I also think it's important for you to know that our governing board, as you would expect, is fully engaged. We had a governing board call last week, virtually, of course, and we have a meeting coming up in about 2 weeks. That's our regular governing board meeting. So everything is moving along on a normal course there. I also hope you know that it's our role at the Community Foundation to step up in a time of crisis. And to that end, we have launched the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund, about which you will hear a great deal more in just a few minutes. This is the first ever collaboration on such a fund with our friends and colleagues at the United Way of Greater Houston. And we're excited about that. And I think more importantly, the community seems excited. Our public sector leaders, foundations and other funders, and we're working hard to make it as seamless and smooth as possible. And you'll hear that we're really working hard to get the dollars out to start addressing some of these crushing needs in the very near future. Might be interesting for you to know that there are similar efforts going on all around the country. Many of the larger cities have Community Foundation United Way collaborations in a very similar vein, with large funds in cities like New York, Seattle, Chicago, and so forth. And of course, here in Houston, we're facing not only the same challenge the entire country is facing economically, but also what's happening in the oil and gas sector. And yet it's still exciting to see how many people are stepping up and opening their hearts and their wallets at this critically important time. And I want you to know that we reach out to our colleagues nationally on a regular basis to share great ideas and to learn together. And also I want to emphasize something that many of you probably already know, which is that our nonprofit colleagues, many of them are really hurting, especially ones that are small and medium sized. Many of them have few reserves to start with. They've of course had to cancel fundraisers. They have fewer volunteers available. And of course the needs have absolutely soared over the past few weeks. And philanthropy can help bridge this crisis. So if you're engaged with some of those nonprofits, if you haven't already, and I suspect many of you have, please reach out to them, see how they're doing, find out what their needs are. And if you want to make a grant to them, we're here to make that happen quickly. And once again, as always, thank you for your leadership in our community and for your great philanthropic work. Jennifer?
Thank you, Steve. I just want to remind everyone that you can use the chat function at the bottom to send any questions or comments or just to say hello. We miss all of you. So now I'd like to turn it over to Mike Pawson, the CFO of GHCF, who has been monitoring many things, including getting us up and running for remote grant making. But in particular, he's been monitoring the COVID relief laws and the various resources that will be and are being made available to nonprofits, including Greater Houston Community Foundation. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. So as Steve mentioned, most probably of the nonprofits in our community are really hurting in this current environment. Fortunately, there are several portions of the recently passed COVID relief laws that have elements that could broadly impact charities. And I'm going to briefly touch on 5 areas of relief so that you can be aware of what possibilities there might be to help charities that you're involved in. Each of these are fairly nuanced and technical, so I'm going to be giving a little bit of a streamlined summary. My goal here is just to make you aware of these and give you a high-level overview. In the follow-up information that we'll send out, we'll have a link to some sites that go into more detail. I want to make sure you're aware of these, particularly because some of these may have a first-come, first-served element to the application. So those 5, the first, which is the simplest, is delay of paying payroll taxes. So the employer share of FICA for the rest of 2020 doesn't have to be paid on time. Organizations can pay half of it by the end of 2021 and the other half by the end of 2022. So this is effectively an interest-free loan, one that you don't have to apply for or go through a whole lot of hoops. The caution, though, is that this does not apply to employers who get loan forgiveness under the Paycheck Protection Program, which I'll talk about in a moment, and for many nonprofits is going to be a better deal. The second area of relief is what's called the Employee Retention Credit. So employers that see a 50% drop in quarterly revenue compared to the same quarter last year due to COVID shutdowns may get a refundable tax credit of half of wages up to $10,000 per employee. And that continues each quarter until revenue grows back to 80% of prior year. Advance payment of this is possible, but also this is not eligible in conjunction with the Paycheck Protection Program, which for many organizations may be the easiest and best option. So the third area is the Paycheck Protection Program. For many nonprofits, it's going to be the best option. Basically, the government will provide, under the auspices of the SBA, the Small Business Administration, loans equal to 2.5 months of payroll, capped at $10 million. And these are long-term, low rate, pretty generous terms on these loans, no collateral, no personal guarantees, and so forth. But the real benefit is that for most organizations, these loans can quickly convert to grants. So under the program, 8 weeks after the loan gets originated, the loan converts to a grant for the amount that the organization spent on payroll, rent, mortgage interest, and utilities during that 8-week window. That loan forgiveness, though, is reduced or lost if the employer cuts headcount, so if you have layoffs, or if you reduce wages. So basically the idea here is that if you're willing to keep your payroll going, there's a program here where the government will effectively fund 2 months of it, along with contributions towards rent. So for many organizations, it's going to be the easiest one. Applications were supposed to open for this today. I saw some wording that it might be delayed just because there's so much inquiry, but these are administered under the SBA, but you apply through your bank. And this one has a capped amount of total relief. It's high. It's in the hundreds of billions, but there is a cap. So there's probably a time urgency to getting applications in once they open. The last two that I'll touch on briefly, the fourth is the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loans. So these are loans of up to $2 million with up to a 30-year term and no payments for the first year. Nonprofits have a rate of 2.75%. So under normal circumstances, those are fairly good terms for lending. The problem is that this is mutually exclusive with the Paycheck Protection Program, that participation in this can offset eligibility in that other program. But for nonprofits that literally formed or expanded right as COVID was starting, they may not have enough wages and payroll in the look-back period under the prior program, the Paycheck Protection. But under this program, almost everybody is eligible for a $10,000 emergency grant that need not be repaid and is supposed to be paid within 3 days of application, although I expect that will not be something that they can execute on quite that quickly. So this is for most, this will be kind of a consolation prize. If for whatever reason you're not eligible for the loan based on 2.5 months payroll, there might be a $10,000 emergency grant. Or for smaller organizations, this may end up being potentially a better option. And then the fifth and final one is a little bit different because the first four were a little bit more relief directed at the organizations under the umbrella purpose of helping the employees as well. The fifth is just a new labor law requirement. Wanted to make you aware that for the balance of 2020, there are 2 new federal leave requirements related to COVID that impact all employers, including nonprofits under 500 employees. The first gives 2 weeks of sick leave for COVID-related causes, and then the second takes that up to 12 weeks under an analog to the Family Leave Act program. But purposes, there's a list of specific eligible purposes. Depending on which one an employee claims under, they either get full pay or partial pay. But the main thing that makes this interesting to employers is the amount that you pay your employees under this leave is eligible for a refundable tax credit. So organizations that are worried about taking care of any of their employees that may have lengthy leave needs as a result of COVID should know that this law both mandates that they provide the leave, but also provides a framework where most of the cost of that leave won't ultimately be borne by the organization where it's eligible for reimbursement. The flip side of that is organizations also have to worry that there are some causes here that are very employee friendly. For example, having children out of school due to COVID makes employees eligible to take these leaves. And so a federally protected leave that could impact almost all of your workforce could be disruptive for organizations. But so far we haven't heard a whole lot about that happening. So those are the 5 programs to be aware of. Like I said, this is only scratching the surface. There are a lot of specifics on who is or isn't eligible or what types of expenses aren't. So definitely learn more, but I wanted to make you aware for any organizations that you're involved with that they might need to look into some or all of these as avenues for possible relief. And with that, I'll pass things back over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Mike. It was really helpful information. Now we're going to hear from Stephanie Blair. Many of you know Stephanie. She is our Director of Corporate Relations, and she leads our corporate giving efforts and unfortunately has been doing some amount of employee and disaster relief for GHCF. I had originally written since Hurricane Harvey, and unfortunately she had to remind me it was actually since the 2016 tax day floods. And in response to the many disasters, unfortunately, that have impacted local companies and our community. And she'll give you a brief update on what's happening related to employee disaster relief funds now with the COVID-19 emergency. Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So GHCF works with companies every day to help them achieve their social investment goals through our suite of customized services. And we have a long history, as Jennifer said, of working with companies in times of disaster. During Hurricane Harvey, we managed over 60 corporate employee disaster relief funds and took in over $13 million in gifts and sent out over 3,300 individual grants to affected employees. And while Harvey was certainly our largest natural disaster in recent history, we've also assisted employees affected by the tax day floods, Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, an earthquake in Alaska, multiple California wildfires, and most recently, Tropical Storm Melba, just to name a few. So we can assist clients anywhere in the United States, including U.S. territories, as long as the event is a federally declared major disaster. And although COVID-19 is not a natural disaster, it has been federally declared as a major disaster in 31 states and 4 U.S. territories as of this morning, and they're adding more every day. And our team is already serving clients who are looking to support their employees during these difficult times. So while IRS guidelines prevent corporate disaster relief funds from replacing lost or reduced income, which, as we all know, that's a critical need right now, the funds can help offset costs associated with working remotely, homeschooling, childcare, medical, or even funeral costs related to COVID-19. And as some of you may be aware, there's a Federal Reserve survey that says a surprising number of Americans report that they could not pay a $400 emergency expense without borrowing or selling something. And so if you think about it, there are likely folks on this webinar who have had unexpected costs related to COVID for us to support ourselves working from home, or our family members who are our kids homeschooling. So employee disaster relief funds are really meant to provide quick relief to those with small margins in their budget and help lessen the burden of these unexpected costs. And so we're really here to help our clients so they can stay focused on their mission in business at this time. And we just want to thank all of you, our donors and partners, for standing with us to support our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that update. And Stephanie is available to help any of you if you have questions related to your company. So now I'll be turning the program over to our COVID fund team, at least part of our team here at GHCF, Tony Chase, who is co-chair of the COVID-19 Recovery Fund Advisory Committee. and also a member of the GHCF governing board. He was also co-chair of the Hurricane Harvey Relief Fund. So unfortunately, he also was no stranger to this work with the Community Foundation and for the community. Renee Wizig-Barrios, who's our Senior Vice President and Chief Philanthropy Officer, who many of you know, also led our Hurricane Harvey Relief Fund efforts and leads our philanthropic services and community philanthropy work. And they will be joined by Diana Zarzuelo, who is our Senior Director of Community Philanthropy, who recently helped launch and lead the launch of the Understanding Houston Community Indicators Initiative, which many of you gave to and participated in, and she also supports our community philanthropy and leadership work more broadly. They have all been hard at work over the past, I guess, almost 2 weeks now, working on the COVID-19 Relief Fund effort. Welcome, Tony, and I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for your leadership and for taking time also today to be with us in our donor and client community. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. I especially appreciate the participation of all the folks on the webinar. Critical time for our community once again, but you know, I'm always heartened by the response and the spirit of people on the Gulf Coast. So I'm sure we'll get through this just fine. Let me give you a little bit of overview, kind of, you know, what's going on and through my lens, and we'll just take it from there. GHCF and the United Way have joined together to establish this COVID-19 recovery fund. The county judge has endorsed this fund. The mayor has specifically endorsed this fund. We've begun to, I guess we announced it last week, and we've begun to receive substantial contributions from folks around the city. I just learned of a new one this morning, a 7-figure contribution, corporate contribution. So I'm excited about that. I won't get out in front of it, but I'm sure it'll be announced in the next day or two. And I think the important thing to mention here is that this is the fund, the COVID-19, Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund, that is being set up to meet the critical needs and severe financial hardships experienced by vulnerable families and individuals in our 4-county area. And I believe that GHCF and the United Way are uniquely situated to address this because of because of their past experience with disaster recovery efforts, in particular Hurricane Harvey. As mentioned, I was co-chair of the Harvey effort and got to see firsthand how each of these organizations worked in that context and did a great job. Secondly, because more so than any other organizations in the area, they house the experts on the grant making side and have, you know, long-standing relationships with the nonprofits in the community who have the capacity to not only help, but to help immediately and to get the resources where they're needed the most, the quickest. So let me speak a little bit to the need and the response. We believe there's a severe need. You know, you don't have to look any further than, you know, the nightly news to see what's, you know, the devastation in the economy and caused by COVID-19. Of course, that's exacerbated here on the Gulf Coast because we've also had sort of a once in a generation oil price crash at the same time. And so the devastation here, I think, is the economic devastation is widespread and acute in a way that perhaps is somewhat greater than most other places. There are also acute needs. There's and everybody's heard about the federal stimulus and so forth, but recall, the undocumented community is not entitled to participate in that at all, and so we have to be mindful of that as well, and we certainly are in terms of how we direct our funds. The funds will serve the 4 counties, Harris, Fort Bend, Montgomery, and Waller. 100% of the funds will be spent to help those in need. In other words, the administrative cost of the funds, the administrative cost of the effort will be borne through a separate grant by the Houston Endowment to cover that. So 100% of the funds go to address the need. We have committed to act swiftly. We hope to get the first large grant out the door by April 15th. In fact, I'm sure we will get it out the door by April 15th. So we've got funds in house, and we plan to do that. The governance of the fund is just, it's replete with transparency. I'm lucky to have Nancy McGregor and Laura Jaramillo join me from the GHCF board as representatives, and the United Way has asked Irma Diaz-Gonzalez, Lynn Elsenhands, and Bob Harvey to represent the United Way, and then finally Wiping Sun is the community representative, and we. There's that advisory task force that we populate will in turn oversee a grants committee that is replete with experts essentially in grant making from GHCF, from the Houston Endowment, and from the United Way. And those decisions made by the grants committee, you can see the grants people on the screen now. Those grant decisions will be ratified at the advisory level and made, and they'll be reported on our relevant websites. The COVID-19 Recovery Fund has its own website, and of course, the partner websites will be a platform for this as well. I guess the final thing I would say is please donate. It's so clear. I'm a trustee at the Houston Endowment and have been for the last several years, and the endowment made $1 million lead gift, if you will, to this effort. The endowment, as everyone knows, the endowment made that gift and actually, as importantly, made a challenge gift of an additional dollar for every $4 raised. So another $1 million will come when we raise an additional $4 million and from the endowment. And so we are excited about that and getting after that, those additional funds. I think that's about all I have to say, other than just to say that it's a great group of people to go to battle with, that we've got on this team. And, the battle is not so much against the virus as it is against fear and the unknown. And so my sense is that this is part of the larger effort, to address the needs of the least among us. And that really does reflect in a meaningful way the character of who we are. So thanks for joining the webinar, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much, Tony. We're so grateful for your leadership and for the ability to partner with you once again on behalf of our community. I also want to thank all of our donors and clients and friends for joining us today, and also for those of you who've already given, because many of you have already given to the COVID-19 Recovery Fund. You may be wondering what our fundraising status is at this point. And I would say right now, the last report, we had about $3 million in gifts so far, but many more come really quite regularly, and we are still very much in the midst of fundraising. I want to just emphasize a few points about the grant making and how we're conducting it and our commitment to our community. Our commitment is obviously to make the greatest possible impact we possibly can on the people who need the most help. We understand this is an unprecedented crisis. There will be more people who need assistance than these funds possibly can assist. So we are using data to the best of our knowledge in order to make the best possible decisions that we can. We are actively really understanding the stimulus package and who is left out of it, and all of those issues in order to know where our help is needed. We have the benefit of getting the reports from the 211 helpline on a daily basis. There have been over 20,000 calls to 211, most of them really focusing on food and financial assistance. We also obviously have a very open door to the nonprofit community, and Diana Zarzuela will talk in just a couple of minutes about the way that we have been reaching out and gathering data to inform our decisions. So know that our commitment is to ensure that we get help to those who need it most as quickly as possible in the most effective way as possible. As Tony mentioned, we are actively working right now on our first round of grants. The advisory task force has given a preliminary approval for those focus areas, which will really be on food and basic needs, as well as emergency financial assistance for many people being left out of the CARE Act. We have a very clear sense of the vulnerable populations. We have maps that show us where the most socially vulnerable people are, how they are at risk for COVID, as well as the information about who's being left out of the stimulus and who will qualify for unemployment and who will not. So there will be a very strong focus in this first round on ensuring that food is able to be provided to those who need it, and that emergency financial assistance, in other words, funds that people can use to pay for medical bills, for utility, for other basic needs like prescriptions, et cetera, get in their hands as quickly as possible. Because of that, we are very much focused on working with very high-performing, proven nonprofit organizations. So we have been able to leverage data about who has performed well in the past. We are leveraging data that the Greater Houston Community Foundation has, the United Way has, the Houston Endowment has, to invite proven nonprofit partners who have very strong relationships with the vulnerable communities that we are trying to serve. So this is an invitation-only process. It is necessary in a time of crisis to mobilize funds very quickly and to rely on partners who have a track record of serving those most in need, who know how to reach the undocumented, who know how to reach seniors, who know how to reach people in crisis and have those pre-existing relationships and outreach plans. We have already invited our first group of nonprofits to apply. And as Tony said, those funds will be out to the nonprofits before April 15th. If you are aware of nonprofits who are curious about the fund, we do have a way to receive inquiries. Any nonprofit can email us at covidresponse@ghcf.org. We have a nonprofit inquiry form that nonprofits can complete if they have questions about seeking funds. And our grants committee will be looking at those nonprofit inquiries and determining whether there's anyone else who should be invited for future rounds. We anticipate that the fund will make at least 3 rounds of grants. This first round, we want to be quite significant to address these acute needs, but we also obviously realize the needs are going to change over time. Unfortunately, as cases spike in our community, also as we learn more about how the unemployment benefits are going to be reaching our community, as we learn even more about the stimulus. And so we would expect that after this first round of grants goes out, we will be committed to probably getting the second round of grants out within 3 to 4 weeks afterwards. We want a little time to assess how the need is evolving and to continue to hear from the nonprofits and from our community members about their needs. But we will act very quickly with the second round of grants, and then there will be a third round a bit later. Of course, all of this also has to coincide with our fundraising, and that's why every dollar contributed really does make an impact. We're so grateful for the Houston Endowment Challenge Grant. We believe that this provides a really extra and exciting stimulus to our community to leverage your gift. And so the Houston Endowment has been an incredible partner of the Community Foundation and, of course, of the Houston community for hundreds of years. And in this case, we are really grateful for their partnership and really also appreciative that, you know, the challenge grant is flowing to the fund regularly. So the more our donors give, the more we are able to draw down that challenge grant, the faster we're able to help those in need. So it's all a virtuous cycle of good, is how we see it. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Diana Zarzuelo to talk about the nonprofit needs survey and the way we've been communicating with our nonprofits and trying to share information with our donors so that everyone can have the best information that they need in order to make an impact, because we know each of you cares so much about our community. So thank you so much, and I will now turn it over to Diana.
Yes, great. Thanks, Renee. I'll just take a few minutes to share with you some data that we've gathered and shared back to the community related to nonprofit needs and capacity of many of our trusted partners who are typically active in disaster response. And in Houston, that usually looks like hurricanes and flooding, but many of them are now activated to really address the urgent needs related to the pandemic. So here is our homepage, greaterhoustonrecovery.org for the Joint Fund. It has a number of pages and tabs here for more information and learning how to give. But we wanted to draw your attention to the nonprofit needs data dashboard. So we'll just click there. So the Greater Houston Community Foundation, along with several partners, designed a survey to quickly assess nonprofit needs and capacity. And that survey happened about 3 weeks ago at this point. And we wanted to learn from those trusted partners how they were adapting to mitigate the COVID-19 spread, what they were hearing early on from the communities they serve in terms of needs and services, and then also what they were doing to respond safely to increased demand to meet urgent needs due to the pandemic. And truthfully, we realized later on that the survey also served to really activate some of our partners. Things were unfolding so rapidly at that time. We shared key resources through the survey, including some guiding questions, if they were just beginning to kind of wrap their minds around what was happening. And the survey itself also kind of forced leaders to wrestle with some realities that they were facing. So in all, it was about 15 to 20 questions, depending on how you responded, and it went out to about 100 nonprofits, again, those who are typically active in disaster response. And it's important to note that we didn't aim to get a really broad sense of how the entire nonprofit sector is faring. As Steve mentioned, we know that every nonprofit is facing very, very difficult circumstances right now. And we'd be happy to share our insight during the Q&A if people are interested. But the initial purpose of this survey was really to take a pulse of our targeted, trusted nonprofit leaders who typically do activate in times of disaster. So here is our data dashboard. And in terms of summary, we received 76 responses back from those partners. And we created 2 tools to share that information broadly, which includes for our donors here on the webinar and other partners. One is this data dashboard, and I'll speak to some basic functionality quickly. And the second is this summary report, which you can see linked here. And I'll touch on that just to highlight a few key findings in just a minute. But for the data dashboard, we just want to point out that there are 4 tabs at the top that offer different views and different elements of the data. This first tab, Capacity Needs Survey, really reflects the aggregate results of all 76 nonprofit partners for most of the key questions. You can filter using the drop-down menu on the left here to filter by county. If you're interested in a particular county, that'll show the organizations that primarily serve that county. And then just another key point is that as you hover over these data points, you'll be able to uncover additional information. So for example, if we're looking at preparedness, we asked organizations to assess their level of preparedness for this pandemic and had 4 different response options. And so you can see a little over half are highly prepared. We have a formal written plan in place and have been executing on it for several days, or they have a plan in place and are beginning to execute. So slight majority of them are feeling prepared or highly prepared for this situation, even as unique as it is. So we thought that was something to highlight, and also just to show you the functionality of the hover feature. We also have another tab here at the top called Top Needs. And so quickly, this is just one open-ended question that we asked in the survey. We think it's the most important, which was, what are the 3 things that you would need to meet increased demand safely during this pandemic? And so you can see here at the top, we have most folks said funding, certainly at the top of the list, more staff as well, technology, volunteers, collaboration, and also personal protective equipment and sanitation supplies together were also spoken to frequently. And then we have 2 additional tabs here at the top, organization summary and organization detail. And I'm gonna focus in on the detail version. The summary version is open to the public and just shares a few key questions by organization. So you can filter using the drop down on the left to see any organization that you care about and see their responses to just a few key questions. On organization detail, you can see those same questions and many, many more. This is password protected. We didn't want to, air out every single response to the survey from our nonprofit partners, but they did give us permission. We were transparent about the fact that we'd be sharing this information. We just wanted to share it a little bit more discreetly. So we are sending out the password to our donors and other partners as a follow-up to the webinar. If you'd like to use this, and this page will give you the ability to see the responses to every single question that we asked by nonprofit partner. So for example, here we're looking at the Houston Food Bank. As one example, it'll share with you their highest needs ranked in order, their biggest priorities for what they're adapting to at the time, which again is about 3 weeks ago, their triggers for when they might close, some scenarios for when they might consider closing, the priority services they're really working hard to maintain, and many other open-ended questions. So there you have a wealth of information to learn more about nonprofit partners that you care about, and you might consider funding if you're able to. So finally, going back to the summary report, just really quickly, wanted to draw some attention to some key findings when we looked at aggregate responses as a whole. So we found that 86% of organizations have already made moderate and significant accommodations by mid-March, essentially between March 13th and about the 22nd was when the survey was live. And that includes making investments in technology, sanitation, and deep cleaning, and also transitioning to remote work for many staff. Despite challenges, the nonprofits that responded are maintaining operations. You can see here that 99% of those that responded said that they were operational, with a majority, 63%, saying that they were operating partially. And then we did give them a few scenarios, trying to understand their trigger points in terms of when they might consider ceasing operations. And we found that you can see the breakdown here, but 42% of organizations said that they were unlikely to close even under very extreme conditions. The most extreme being that public health officials encourage large-scale quarantine or neighborhood or geographic quarantine, and that really speaks to the commitment to the mission of these nonprofit leaders and nonprofit organizations, and knowing that the people that they serve, the most vulnerable, are the ones that will be most in need during this time. And then organizations already see an increase in demand for services at this time, and with the majority of inquiries being from the community related to basic needs, emergency financial assistance, and information and guidance around COVID-19. But you can see kind of the breakdown in terms of what people are asking for here from the community perspective. And then if we keep going, we also, and again, 66% expecting significant or exponential increase in demand in the following weeks. In terms of nonprofit needs, it was a very clear message that nonprofit partners need flexible funding for a number of reasons, but the two primary reasons being to offset lost revenue for general operations because of canceled fundraising events, as Steve mentioned, or program revenue. Many of our nonprofit partners do have strong revenue streams from the programs that they operate, and those, because they're not operating in typical fashion, there's reduction in program revenue, and then we have heard that some foundations and corporate partners who have made multi-year commitments aren't able to fulfill those commitments. So that is really exacerbating the challenges nonprofits are facing. And then the second reason for an increase in flexible funding need is to respond to the increased demand related to COVID-19. So we're seeing both of those being major drivers for increased funding. And then our nonprofit partners also spoke to a desire for coordinated response, collective response, investments, to really leverage assets across the nonprofit sector and try to coordinate and maximize what we do have as much as possible. And they spoke to both in the short term for COVID-19, but also in the long term for the long-term recovery for related to the pandemic, and then also for the long term for the next disaster. So those are some of the highlights in terms of what we heard and what we wanted to draw attention to. Thanks so much, and let us know if you have any questions about it, and I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
We do have a couple of quick questions. Thank you. So the first question came to Mike. Can you explain the changes to the charitable deduction, starting with the 2020 taxable year up to $300 in cash charitable contributions will be allowed as an above-the-line deduction? I think that was the question.
Sure.
So,
Yeah,
Mike.
So it sounds like the questioner basically knows the answer, and I skipped over this because I didn't think this would be as relevant to most of our donors. But yes, the individual income tax rules related to charitable deductions for 2020 were changed as part of the COVID relief in a couple of ways. First is that everybody, people taking the itemized deductions, or not taking itemized deductions, rather, taking the standard deduction can take a $300 above the line deduction for donations to charity. So that should be a little bit of encouragement maybe for smaller givers who weren't reaching the realm of itemization to still give to charity and get some tax benefit for it. Secondly, for those who are itemizing, the limitation on 50% of AGI as far as what's eligible for charitable deduction is suspended for 2020, and for corporations the limit of 10% has been increased to 25%. So a little bit more flexibility for tax benefits to those who donate to charity this year.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question, probably for you, Diana. As more organizations complete the survey, is the data going to be updated?
Yes, we are updating the dashboard to reflect more responses from our disaster kind of response organizations, but we're also building another dashboard that will be more inclusive to all nonprofit responses that we receive, and then also the nonprofit inquiries that we're getting in that also ask them key questions. So yes, we've already shared the data in an Excel file to the grant making community. There's a regular call that our partners at United Way facilitate weekly. So we are sharing the data, but we'll be creating a publicly available dashboard soon.
Great. Let's see. I just want to express a couple of comments from people coming in about concern for out-of-work restaurant workers, which will hopefully people will be able to access resources through the various ministries and nonprofits that are being funded. A question about access to resources from the fund for mid-sized nonprofits or potentially nonprofits that may not be providing food and shelter, whether that's now or in the future.
I'll take that question. I see there's also a question about equity. I think there's some misunderstanding from some of the people listening. We are absolutely committed to ensuring that the organizations that we are making grants to have a track record of supporting vulnerable populations. Do not misunderstand that to mean that these are all large nonprofits. We're not at liberty to give you the list of the organizations who've been invited at this point, but rest assured that they are organizations of all sizes, from very small grassroots organizations who do incredible work with specific populations to very large organizations. So please do not equate proven with large, because they are not the same thing. We are extremely, extremely focused on ensuring that the organizations who will be funded through this process have the capacity to reach hard to reach populations, low-income people, vulnerable people, seniors, LGBTQ people, undocumented, laid off workers. And so very much we have taken into account the organizations that have worked tirelessly with the most vulnerable people in our community, but that does not mean that these are all large organizations. There are organizations of all sizes being invited to participate in the funding. We absolutely are concerned about equity, and the Grants Committee has a very keen eye for ensuring that organizations being invited have those connections. Now, if you have a concern about an organization that you feel is doing incredible work, please use the nonprofit inquiry form and encourage that organization to complete a nonprofit inquiry form so that they can be considered. In terms of the question about organizations providing other things beyond food and financial assistance, certainly as we continue to study the data and look at the needs of the community for future rounds, we will be considering other organizations that can deliver the services that the grants committee and task force determine should be prioritized by the fund. So the initial round of grants focusing on food and financial assistance is not necessarily indicative of where the fund will go in future rounds. We will be agile. We will adjust to the needs. And I don't know if Diana or Tony want to respond to that as well, but just rest assured that we are focusing on organizations who can be effective, but that does not mean that they are necessarily only large. They are of all sizes.
You know, the only thing I'd add to that is in the Harvey context, we confronted the same situation really, where we wanted to be sensitive to emerging nonprofits on the ground that had particularly good relationships and within hard to reach communities. And all in all, sometimes it's a little riskier, I think, but you know, I think the reward tends to be greater in those situations as well. And the only thing I'd say about that is that I thought maybe that was the one area, maybe the best area, if you will, in my judgment, for our experience in Harvey, where the grant-making experts really sought out how to most effectively distribute resources, whether it was with long-standing existing nonprofits or whether it was with, you know, the Cajun Navy, right? And I thought they did a great job at that.
Thank you, Tony. We are, I appreciate that. We are out of time. I'm going to ask Allison to scroll to the last slide. We do have instructions in the slides. If you are a fund holder with Greater Houston Community Foundation and you want to use your fund, there's instructions in the slide which you will get about how to do that. You can also email us, whether you're a donor, nonprofit, anybody, at covidresponse@ghcf.org. We can answer further questions. I just want to thank all of you for your generosity. And I'm saying that because you're on this call because you care. You care about our community. You want to make a difference. We are one community and we will get through this together. Each one of you and each one of us at GHCF is here for each one of you. Please reach out and let us know how we can help you help our community, and we'll get through this together. Thank you so much, and we hope to actually see some of you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Have a great afternoon and stay healthy.